In a small southern town, where power sat comfortably in the hands of the wealthy, Judge Alistair Crane held his gavel like a weapon. To him, justice wasn't a principle but a commodity, something to be bought, sold, or twisted to serve those who paid the most. Behind the polished oak bench and the stern voice of authority, he concealed years of corruption. He had taken bribes from local businessmen, dismissed charges against their sons, and jailed innocent men to cover his tracks. On the opposite end of this imbalance stood Jamal Turner, a 27-year-old mechanic. Jamal was known around town for his skill with engines, his easy laugh, and his devotion to his younger sister Maya, who dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Their mother had raised them to believe in fairness, in the dignity of hard work, and in the promise that the law was meant to protect everyone equally. But that belief was about to be tested in ways Jamal never imagined. It began when a wealthy developer, Charles Whitmore, faced fraud allegations that could have ended his career. Whitmore had built half the strip malls in town, funded political campaigns, and dined with Alistair Crane more than once. For him, prison wasn't an option. So, money quietly changed hands, thick envelopes slipped under tables, favors whispered in dark corners. The agreement was clear. Someone else would take the fall and Whitmore would walk free. That someone turned out to be Jamal Turner. His only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One evening, he had gone to deliver spare parts to a friend's garage near the construction site Whitmore's company owned. A few days later, he was accused of stealing equipment worth thousands of dollars. There was no proof tying him to the crime, but in Crane's courtroom, evidence mattered less than influence. When Jamal first stood before the judge, he felt strangely calm. He had faith in the truth. He believed the misunderstanding would clear itself up. His sister Maya squeezed his hand in reassurance. Their lawyer, a modest public defender named Alex Grant, spoke firmly, presenting receipts and time logs showing Jamal had been at work when the theft supposedly occurred. But every word seemed to bounce off Crane's stone face. The prosecutor, meanwhile, painted Jamal as a repeat troublemaker, someone who grew up on the wrong side of town and surely had a hidden record of mischief. Crane nodded along, occasionally tapping his gavel like punctuation to the lies. In reality, Jamal had never been in trouble a day in his life. When the gavel finally fell, the verdict stunned everyone. "Guilty," Judge Crane declared, sentencing Jamal to 3 years in prison. Gasps filled the courtroom. Maya cried out, demanding to know how the evidence could be ignored, but bailiffs quickly silenced her. Jamal stood frozen, his faith in fairness cracking like glass. What no one in that room knew was that Crane's decision had nothing to do with justice. It was about a bribe, a secret so carefully hidden, until someone pressed the wrong button on a recorder. Prison hit Jamal harder than the gavel had. The clang of steel doors, the echo of boots on concrete, the suffocating air of confinement. It all pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shrug off. His cell was narrow, with peeling paint and a cot too short for his frame. Every night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the trial in his mind. He wasn't just angry. He was bewildered. How could truth lose so completely to lies? Some inmates treated him with suspicion at first, others with quiet pity. Jamal learned quickly to keep his head down, but inside, bitterness brewed. Each day felt stolen from him, each minute proof that the system didn't care about innocence. Yet he clung to one source of hope, letters from his sister Maya. Maya refused to let despair swallow them. She wrote almost daily, her words sharp with determination. "You are not forgotten. I'll get you out. Justice doesn't belong to him. It belongs to us." By day, she worked long shifts at the diner. By night, she pored over law books at the library, taking notes and studying case after case. She was only 19, but her conviction burned brighter than any degree. Neighbors whispered she was wasting her time. Friends told her to accept what happened. But Maya shook them off. She knew her brother's heart, and she knew corruption when she saw it. Meanwhile, Judge Crane carried on as if nothing were amiss. In public, he was polished and confident, a man who commanded respect. Yet behind closed doors, cracks in his mask began to show. He had accepted bribes before, But this case lingered differently. Jamal's sister's outbursts in court haunted him. The boy's steady, bewildered gaze the moment the verdict was read replayed in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. Still, Crane reassured himself with his usual mantra: power protects itself. He told himself no one would ever connect Whitmore's freedom to Jamal's imprisonment. The town respected him too much, feared him too deeply. He had built a career on being untouchable. But what Crane didn't know was that Alex Grant, the weary public defender who had represented Jamal, wasn't finished either. Though defeated in court, Alex had left the trial unsettled. Something in Crane's demeanor had felt off. Too dismissive, too rehearsed. Against protocol, Alex requested transcripts, began piecing together inconsistencies, and started asking quiet questions around town. At the same time, Maya's persistence began drawing attention. She showed up at council meetings, cornered reporters, and buttonholed local officials. Most dismissed her as a desperate girl chasing windmills, but a few began to wonder. Why was she so relentless? And what was Judge Crane so eager to keep buried? Inside the prison yard, Jamal caught whispers too. One guard, after a long shift, muttered under his breath, "You got screwed, kid. Everyone knows it." Jamal wanted to ask more, but the guard walked away quickly, leaving the words hanging heavy in the air. It was the first hint that the truth wasn't buried as deeply as Judge Crane believed. The first real crack in Judge Crane's wall of power came not from a lawyer or a politician, but from chance. Charles Whitmore, the wealthy developer whose freedom Crane had protected, grew careless. During a private dinner at a country club, Whitmore bragged to a colleague about how easily problems disappeared when you had the right judge on your payroll. He laughed too loudly, spoke too freely, and never noticed the tiny recorder sitting on the table between them. The device belonged to his own associate, a junior partner in his company who had grown uneasy with Whitmore's arrogance. That associate slipped the recording to a local reporter named Dana Ruiz, a sharp investigator known for chasing stories most people were too afraid to touch. Dana listened in disbelief as Whitmore's voice spilled out. "Crane handled it. Some mechanics doing time for me. Cost me less than a new car." The evidence was explosive, but Dana knew she couldn't rush. A single tape wasn't enough. Crane had friends in high places who would bury the story unless it was airtight. So she began connecting dots, pulling financial records, following paper trails, and quietly reaching out to people who had stood in Crane's courtroom before. One by one, old cases began to look suspicious. Meanwhile, Maya pressed harder than ever. She organized small rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Free Jamal and Justice is not for sale." At first, only a handful of neighbors joined her. But with each passing week, the crowd grew: students, workers, church members, all drawn by her fierce conviction. She didn't know about the recording yet, but her voice was building the momentum that would make it impossible to ignore once the truth surfaced. Inside prison, Jamal felt the stirrings of hope without fully understanding why. His sister's letters spoke of whispers in town, of a reporter digging deep. He didn't dare let himself believe too much. Disappointment hurt too badly. But at night he allowed himself the smallest dream, walking out the gates free, head held high, knowing he had endured without breaking. Judge Crane, however, began to sense the shift. He heard murmurs at the country club, noticed the sideways glances from colleagues who once praised him. His temper grew short on the bench, his rulings more erratic. For the first time in decades, he felt exposed. He doubled down, warning Whitmore to stay quiet, threatening anyone who hinted at betrayal. But corruption has a way of rotting from within, and the more he tried to control it, the more the truth slipped through his grasp. When Dana Ruiz finally confronted Whitmore with her research, his arrogance faltered. She had the tape, yes, but also bank transfers, property records, and testimonies from those who had seen Crane's bias firsthand. Under pressure, Whitmore made a desperate decision. He cut a deal to protect himself, throwing the judge directly under the bus. The walls around Crane were beginning to collapse, and this time no gavel could stop it. The scandal broke like thunder. Dana Ruiz published her investigation in a blistering front-page article. complete with audio clips of Whitmore's drunken brag and the trail of payments leading straight to Judge Crane's accounts. Overnight, the town buzzed with outrage. Radio shows dissected every detail, social media erupted, and television crews swarmed the courthouse steps. For years, people had whispered about Crane's favoritism and questionable verdicts. Now they had proof. Maya stood among the growing crowd outside the courthouse as chants filled the air. "Free Jamal! Free Jamal!" What began as her lonely protest had turned into a movement. Strangers held signs with her brother's name, their voices rising together against corruption. She felt her throat tighten with tears, but she held her head high. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had finally shifted. Crane, meanwhile, sat in his chambers, the once commanding walls of oak and leather now feeling like a prison. Calls from allies went unanswered. The governor's office distanced itself. Even longtime friends at the country club avoided him. He had spent decades ruling others' fates, but now his own future was being carved apart by the same justice system he had mocked. Federal investigators arrived within days. They seized financial records, subpoenaed associates, and questioned court staff. The arrogance Crane had worn so comfortably slipped away, replaced by panic. In one last desperate move, he tried to frame the scandal as a misunderstanding, a smear campaign by radicals. But the evidence was undeniable. When agents confronted him with the recording of Whitmore, his face drained of color. Meanwhile, Jamal's case was reopened. His attorney Alex Grant presented the new evidence, arguing that his conviction was the direct result of judicial corruption. The courtroom, once hostile, now brimmed with reporters, activists, and neighbors who refused to let the injustice be ignored. Maya sat in the front row, clutching a worn photo of her brother taken before prison stole the light from his smile. When the judge presiding over the hearing finally declared Jamal's conviction vacated, the room erupted. Maya rushed forward, tears streaming as she embraced her brother. Jamal, though thinner and older from the ordeal, stood tall. He didn't shout or curse the system that had stolen years from him. He simply whispered to Maya, "We made it." Judge Crane was indicted on multiple charges: bribery, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. His once proud name now carried the weight of disgrace. The man who had wielded the gavel like a weapon was led away in handcuffs, his own courtroom witnessing the collapse of his empire. For Jamal, freedom was both sweet and heavy. He returned home to his garage, where dust-covered tools left untouched for too long. Neighbors greeted him with warmth, and his sister's determination became legend in town. Yet he carried scars that couldn't be seen, the memory of steel doors and lost nights lingering in his bones. Still, he chose to move forward. He volunteered with youth programs, teaching kids about perseverance and warning them of the flaws in a system meant to protect them. And Maya, inspired by the battle she had fought, pursued her dream of law school with a fire no obstacle could extinguish. Their story became more than just a scandal about a crooked judge. It became proof that truth, though often buried, can rise again when someone refuses to stop digging.